Okie doke. And hello, my friends. It is now 1 o'clock in the morning here in sunny California. Well, it's not sunny at the moment, obviously, because it's 1 o'clock in the morning. But in general, California is very sunny. Hi, I'm Tad. I will be here for the next hour reading. We are still reading from Wind in the Willows, and I will be getting to that in a few minutes. Just what else am I going to update you on? Just working, and then today we had a real worry. We woke up. Big dog Johnny was having some kind of serious problem. He was drooling, and he couldn't walk right. So, needless to say, took him off to the emergency vet. Sat there on and off for about 5 hours. Had him go through various tests, blood work, all that stuff. We're assuming at this point, for lack of better information, that he ate something that affected him. He doesn't seem to show any marks of toxicity, but we're going to take him back in tomorrow for a follow-up. Check how his kidneys are functioning, I guess, is what the vet said. It's boy, let me tell you, folks, if you want to find a really fast way to spend many hundreds or even $1,000, get animals, live with pets. It's just amazing. And of course, it always happens on weekends when the regular vets aren't there. So you also then paying the premium for going to an emergency vet. It's so much fun. But the main thing is, obviously, this is our family member, my beloved dog. And so far, he seems to be okay. He seems mostly back to normal. The problem, of course, is that we, except for the area right around the house, which is only a very small part of where Johnny has run of the back of the property, our property is wild, essentially. And there's a large chunk of it that, we don't know what's on it except in the sense that, we walk around occasionally, but we don't, it's all grasses and things growing and plants and stuff of all kinds. Many of them that have just grown there over the years that this property has been here. Some of them predate the house itself probably, which has been here since the 70s. So it's really hard to tell what he might have eaten. Again, though, the good news is he seems to be okay. I was very worried about him. Deb was very worried about him, of course. That's why we took him to the emergency vet, because it's one of those things where if you didn't do it and it proved to be a major serious issue, he was already better by the time I got up. Deb had been up earlier, as she always is. It was better by the time I got up, but it was clearly something was wrong with him. So, obviously, those of you who are pet owners or have children, anybody who can't tell you what the symptoms are and why they're feeling the way they're feeling and what might have happened, it's a question of you do what you have to do to find out. And so, of course, we took him to the emergency vet. And so that was my day, mostly shot to hell. But I would rather have a day shot to hell any day than to lose or even have serious consequences for the dog, because he is a family member and we love him. So there you go. Anyway, what else has been going on? Signing pages for the aforementioned British edition, although of the Dragonbone Chair series. I just sent the Stone of Farewell ones off. I still have 2 books worth, because they're doing it in 4 parts. They're doing it like the paperback, where they're splitting 2 Green Angel Tower into 2 volumes. So I still got another 3,000 or so to sign. But like I've said before, and this will be true when Sean does his American special edition as well, and I'm signing those, or when I'm signing Navigator's Children, when those books are ready in another month or 2. I'd still rather be somebody who's signing books for people than somebody who's not signing books for people, even if my wrists do get a bit sore occasionally. It's a tremendous honor that anybody wants a book with my name, my signature on it, when it's already got my name on it. But if they want my weird scrawly signature, then, you know, I'm honored. Okay, what else is there? As I mentioned before, I am now working on, I'm done with Ordinary Farm. I'm done with Navigator's Children. So I'm working on the early stages of The Splintered Sun, as I have mentioned at some length last week. I'm very much at a stage where I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to tell the story. I know the elements of the story very well. What I'm trying to figure out is how I'm going to tell it. Am I going to give you the thoughts that people have, as I do in the Ostenard books? Or am I going to have a narrative voice telling you more what's going on? Am I going to have more than two characters whose viewpoint we're using? Because they're two main characters. But there will be other secondary characters. And if I'm going to follow my usual pattern, I'm going to have to come up with at least one more character to be a focal point, to be somebody that we're seeing events through. So there's a lot of questions like that have very little to do with the stuff that everybody usually thinks is the hard part of writing a story, you know, coming up with the actual story or inventing the characters or whatever. Those I've been done with for weeks and months. But I'm still trying to figure out how exactly I'm going to tell the story. And I don't mean to make it sound like, oh, poor me. It's not a poor me thing at all. It's actually really interesting. It's one of the most fascinating parts of writing fiction, which I have been doing for a long time. I don't claim to be the world's greatest writer or even one of the world's greatest writers, but I've been doing it for a long time, and I've been dealing with these kinds of issues for a long time. So just as anybody who's very serious about their profession, you know, I'm really interested in how these decisions get made, whether I'm making them myself or if I'm reading some other writer and seeing how she or he made their own decisions. It's just interesting to me. So that's what I'm working on. Let me check and see who might be dropping in today and saying hello. And who have I got so far? Let me check. Oh, you're going to still do this weird thing with the comments, huh? All right. Yeah, you guys are just really annoying. Comments. All right. All I can get right at the moment are the comments that are actually on the page that I can read, which is only about 5 of them. I hate this. It just makes me really irritated. Why do we not have... No, that's having me comment as me, and I am not commenting as me. Anyway, I see Christina is here and has checked in. I see Holger. Hello, Holger. I see Sandra has checked in, and Wouter. Obviously, Ilva has, because, yes, there's Ilva, because they're all talking in German to each other. So, okay, so they're all there. I don't know why, again, they've just vanished the comments this time, which is how I can usually tell who's online, and I can only get the first few comments. Maybe there's only been a few. I don't know. Anyway, I'll try to... I will try to check back in at some point and see if I can figure out why this is different this time and why it's different almost every time. But in the interim, I will let it go for a while until I have let more time go by and I can figure out what's been happening. Anything else? For those of you who have been subscribers to the newsletter in the past, the newsletter is going to start up again. We've been, because of the moves and all that stuff, we have been not doing it since I think back around the winter time, maybe even earlier, I'm not sure. So that's mostly just because it's a work that Deb has had to do that she's had to deprioritize because she's got so many other things, has had so many other things going on. And there's book business, and there's the 2 moves, and there's changing banks, and all these other kinds of things we've had to do because of moving and just because of other issues. But we are going to be. So if you are not on the mailing list, you're not going to get solicited. You're not going to have your information sold. It's a very mom and pop kind of subscription list. All we ever do is if we have something specific we want to tell you about, like, you know, when the next book is due or when it's supposed to come out, or something that we've had information on that we think readers of mine might enjoy or at least be like to be brought up to date on, we will put that on there. I usually write, a few paragraphs or a page or two about just what's going on or things that I'm thinking about or whatever. Oftentimes Deb adds something to it. So if you're interested and you're not on the mailing list as of this point, please let us know. The best thing to do is to write to Deb. And I think you can find a way to contact her. I think there's both a way to contact her on tadwilliams.com, and I think you can also contact her through her Twitter or Facebook feed if you want to get put on the list. It doesn't cost anything. We're not going to sell your information. We're like real people, as you can probably tell looking at my beautiful office, still not fixed. But with all these things coming in that have to be signed and all that, I just keep putting it off and putting it off. It's my own fault. But anyway, so we are bringing back the subscription list, the mailing list, the newsletter, whatever you want to call it. And, please, if you're interested in being on that list, believe me, you're not going to get bombed with stuff, because it really is more like a once every few months thing that we manage to get something out. And, we don't have that much to sell. We're not at the moment, although we're thinking about doing another merch thing someday. We're not at the moment doing anything like that. So all you're going to really hear about is books. And there aren't, God knows I don't have that much time. I don't write books that often. So it's just, for all this stuff with Deb and I, it's just, we want to stay in touch with people and make information available. And some people like to get something in their inbox. So that's what we're doing, or what we're working on. So again, either check tadwilliams.com to send something to us, or try Deb's Facebook or Twitter. I'm not going to call it X. I hate that. That just ticks me off. Anyway, or check that and her site on that, or her whatever you call it. I can't even remember now. Her page, her presence, her locus genii. I don't know what you'd call it. Anyway, okay, so it's about 12 minutes after, and let me make one last check to see if I can figure out anything of what's going on with the comments. I see Iris has shown up. Why am I not getting anything where I can see what comments have been posted? I cannot. It's like they change it every time. Here, let me check this. Maybe this one will give it to me this time. No, that would be too easy. That would make sense. That would be too easy. No. Okay. So all I can see are the comments that are literally on the page, of which they only leave enough room for 4. And the only new one there was Iris has checked in apparently. Oh, and Penny. Hello, Penny. Good to see you too. Anyway, I have given up on this nonsense at the moment. And what I'm going to do then, I guess, is just read. So we are reading Wind in the Willows. I have mentioned many times, and I thank you for indulging me. This book is very special to me for a number of reasons. It's one of the first things that I remember being read and really descending into an alternate world, which of course then has become my stock in trade. Basically, it's become my lifelong habit, profession, whatever you want to call it, is creating alternate worlds. It's one of the first that I can remember, if not, maybe House at Pooh Corner or whatever. But, this was very much one of the earliest things. My mom read it to me. And also, I just think it's a really well-written book. It's just it's a beautiful book. It's very much an escapist piece of work, because while on the one hand there's a certain anti-modernity kind of, but in a nice way, in a friendly kind of way, as you will see with Toad and his cars, his automobiles. But there's a great love for the environment, for the natural world. And I think that obviously, and we'll get to the the chapter titled The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which those of you who are rock and roll aficionados will know became the title of the first Pink Floyd album back in the Syd Barrett days. But, and that is actually a paean to Pan, the god Pan, and the natural world. But in fact, as you've noticed if you've been listening so far, a love for the natural world runs through the entire book. And it's one of the things I think that affected me when I was young. So, there are other things too, but I'll think of other times to talk about some of those. So what we are reading is chapter 6, which is Mr. Toad. Now, so we've already met Toad in the book, and we've seen one of Toad's early misadventures where he takes his friends Rat and Mole out in a beautiful wagon with, horse-drawn cart that's very fancied up for, it's kind of like an RV. It's like a turn of the previous century RV, from the early 1910s or whatever. And getting run off the road by that. And then Toad, of course, as he flits from one fad to another, falling totally in love with the new thing, which in this case is an automobile. Also, we just saw a longish section where Mole went off on his own, hoping to meet Mr. Badger, almost got killed in the woods. Ratty came after him to save him, found him, and then they were both lost in the woods and eventually found Mr. Badger's house. And he treated them very well and took care of them. And then in the process of going home, Mole suddenly realized he was near his old house, his own house, and had a moment of panicked upset that he had just ditched his old and beloved home. And Rat, understanding what was going on, insisted that they go and look at it and go back to it, because Mole has been living with Rat in their bachelor digs at Rat's house for a long time. And they kind of fix the place up, and they have some field mice, children or whatever they are, come in and sing Christmas carols, and it's all very sweet and charming. Anyway, so now we are at chapter 6, Mr. Toad. It was a bright morning in the early part of summer. The river had resumed its wonted banks and its accustomed pace, and a hot sun seemed to be pulling everything green and bushy and spiky up out of the earth towards him, as if by strings. The Mole and the Water Rat had been up since dawn, very busy on matters connected with boats and the opening of the boating season. Painting and varnishing, mending paddles, repairing cushions, hunting for missing boat hooks, and so on. And were finishing breakfast in their little parlor and eagerly discussing their plans for the day. And here they are fixing up the boat, if you can see that. There we go. Takes a while for the thing to kick in and copy properly, or to focus properly. And eagerly discussing their plans for the day when a heavy knock sounded at the door. "Bother," said the Rat, all over egg. "See who it is, Mole, like a good chap, since you've finished." The Mole went to attend the summons, and the Rat heard him utter a cry of surprise. Then he flung the parlor door open and announced with much importance, "Mr. Badger." This was a wonderful thing, indeed, that the Badger should pay a formal call on them, or indeed on anybody. He generally had to be caught if you wanted him badly, as he slipped quietly along a hedgerow of an early morning or a late evening, or else hunted up in his own house in the middle of the wood, which was a serious undertaking. The Badger strode heavily into the room and stood looking at the two animals with an expression full of seriousness. The Rat let his egg spoon fall on the tablecloth and sat open-mouthed. "The hour has come," said the Badger at last with great solemnity. "What hour?" asked the Rat uneasily, glancing at the clock on the mantelpiece. "Whose hour, you should rather say," replied the Badger. "Why, Toad's hour. The hour of Toad. I said I would take him in hand as soon as the winter was well over, and I'm going to take him in hand today." "Toad's hour, of course," cried the Mole delightedly. "Hooray, I remember now. We'll teach him to be a sensible Toad." Brief This just caught me by surprise, a brief thing. That became a very common phrase in our family growing up. Be a sensible toad. Or, I'm so proud of you for being a sensible toad. So that's something that my mom picked up, and then the rest of the family all fell in on. And we still say it occasionally. I certainly do. Toad's hour, of course, cried the mole delightedly. Hooray! I remember now. We'll teach him to be a sensible toad. This very morning, continued the badger, taking an armchair, as I learnt last night from a trustworthy source, another new and exceptionally powerful motor car will arrive at Toad Hall on approval or return. At this very moment, perhaps, Toad is busy arraying himself in those singularly hideous habiliments so dear to him, which transform him from a comparatively good-looking toad into an object which throws any decent-minded animal that comes across it into a violent fit. We must be up and doing ere it is too late. You two animals will accompany me instantly to Toad Hall, and the work of rescue shall be accomplished. And there is a picture of Toad in his driving gear. His long duster coat, his driver's cap, his driving gloves. Oh, yes, all of that. Right you are, cried the rat, starting up. We'll rescue the poor unhappy animal. We'll convert him. He'll be the most converted toad that ever was before we've done with him. They set off up the road on their mission of mercy, Badger leading the way. Animals, when in company, walk in a proper and sensible manner, in single file, instead of sprawling all across the road and being of no use or support to each other in case of sudden trouble or danger. They reached the carriage drive of Toad Hall to find, as the badger had anticipated, a shiny new motor car of great size, painted a bright red, Toad's favorite color, standing in front of the house. As they neared the door, it was flung open, and Mr. Toad, arrayed in goggles, cap, gaiters, and enormous overcoat, came swaggering down the steps, drawing on his gauntleted gloves. "Hello! Come on, you fellows!" he cried cheerfully on catching sight of them. "You're just in time to come with me for a jolly. His hearty accents faltered and fell away as he noticed the stern, unbending look on the countenance of his silent friends, and his invitation remained unfinished. The badger strode up the steps. "Take him inside," he said sternly to his companions. Then, as Toad was hustled through the door, struggling and protesting, he turned to the chauffeur in charge of the new motor car. "I'm afraid you won't be wanted today," he said. "Mr. Toad has changed his mind. He will not require the car. Please understand that this is final. You needn't wait." Then he followed the others inside and shut the door. "Now then," he said to the Toad, when the four of them stood together in the hall, "first of all, take off those ridiculous things." "Shan't," replied Toad with great spirit. "What is the meaning of this gross outrage? I demand an instant explanation." "Take them off him, then, you two," ordered the badger briefly. They had to lay Toad out on the floor, kicking and calling all sorts of names before they could get to work properly. Then the rat sat on him, and the mole got his motor clothes off him bit by bit, and they stood him up on his legs again. A good deal of his blustering spirit seemed to have evaporated with the removal of his fine panoply. Now that he was merely Toad, and no longer the terror of the highway, he giggled feebly and looked from one to the other appealingly, seeming quite to understand the situation. "You knew it must come to this sooner or later, Toad," the badger explained severely. "You've disregarded all the warnings we've given you.
You've gone on squandering the money your father left you, and you're getting us animals bad name in the district by your furious driving, and your smashes, and your rows with the police. Independence is all very well, but we animals never allow our friends to make fools of themselves beyond a certain limit, and that limit you've reached. Now, you're a good fellow in many respects, and I don't want to be too hard on you. I'll make one more effort to bring you to reason. You will come with me into the smoking room, and there you will hear some facts about yourself, and we'll see whether you come out of that room the same Toad that you went in.
He took Toad firmly by the arm, led him into the smoking room, and closed the door behind him.
That's no good, said the rat contemptuously. Talking to Toad will never cure him. He'll say anything.
They made themselves comfortable in armchairs and waited patiently. Through the closed door they could just hear the long, continuous drone of the badger's voice, rising and falling in waves of oratory, and presently they noticed that the sermon began to be punctured at intervals by long-drawn sobs, evidently proceeding from the bosom of Toad, who was a soft-hearted and affectionate fellow, very easily converted, for the time being, to any point of view. After some 3/4 of an hour the door opened, and the badger reappeared, solemnly leading by the paw a very limp and dejected Toad. His skin hung baggily about him, his legs wobbled, and his cheeks were furrowed by the tears so plentifully called forth by the badger's moving discourse.
"Sit down there, Toad," said the badger kindly, pointing to a chair. "My friends," he went on, "I am pleased to inform you that Toad has at last seen the error of his ways. He is truly sorry for his misguided conduct in the past, and he has undertaken to give up motor cars entirely and forever. I have his solemn promise to that effect."
And here's actually a picture from slightly earlier, which is the animals doing their best to remove Toad's driving gear. Poor Toad. Not that he doesn't deserve it.
"That is very good news," said the mole gravely. "Very good news indeed," observed the rat dubiously. Only if.
He was looking very hard at Toad as he said this, and could not help thinking he perceived something vaguely resembling a twinkle in that animal's still sorrowful eye.
"There's only one more thing to be done," continued the gratified badger. "Toad, I want you to solemnly repeat, before your friends here, what you fully admitted to me in the smoking room just now. First, you are sorry for what you've done, and you see the folly of it all."
There was a long, long pause. Toad looked desperately this way and that, while the other animals waited in grave silence.
"No," he said, a little sullenly but stoutly. "I am not sorry, and it wasn't folly at all. It was simply glorious."
"What?" cried the badger, greatly scandalized. "You backsliding animal, didn't you tell me just now, in there—"
"Oh, yes, in there," said Toad impatiently. "I'd have said anything in there. You're so eloquent, dear badger, and so moving, and so convincing, and put all your points so frightfully well. You can do what you like with me in there, and you know it. But I've been searching my mind since, and going over things in it, and I find that I'm not a bit sorry, or repentant, really. So it's no earthly good saying I am now, is it?"
"Then you don't promise," said the badger, "never to touch a motor car again?"
"Certainly not," replied Toad emphatically. "On the contrary, I faithfully promise that the very first motor car I see, poop, poop, off I go in it."
"Told you so, didn't I?" observed the rat to the mole. Very well, then, said the Badger firmly, rising to his feet. Since you won't yield to persuasion, we'll try what force can do. I feared it would come to this all along. You've often asked us three to come and stay with you, Toad, in this handsome house of yours. Well, now we're going to. When we've converted you to a proper point of view, we may quit, but not before. Take him upstairs, you two, and lock him up in his bedroom while we arrange matters between ourselves.
It's for your own good, Toady, you know, said the rat kindly, as Toad, kicking and struggling, was hauled up the stairs by his two faithful friends. Think what fun we shall all have together, just as we used to, when you've quite got over this painful attack of yours. We'll take great care of everything for you till you're well, Toad, said the Mole, and we'll see your money isn't wasted, as it has been. No more of those regrettable incidents with the police, Toad, said the rat as they thrust him into his bedroom. And no more weeks in hospital, being ordered about by female nurses, Toad, added the Mole, turning the key on him. They descended the stair, Toad shouting abuse at them through the keyhole, and the three friends then met in conference on the situation.
Oh, it's going to be a tedious business, said the Badger, sighing. I've never seen Toad so determined. However, we will see it out. He must never be left an instant unguarded. We shall have to take it in turns to be with him, till the poison has worked itself out of his system.
They arranged watches accordingly. Each animal took it in turn to sleep in Toad's room at night, and they divided the day up between them. At first, Toad was undoubtedly very trying to his careful guardians. When his violent paroxysms possessed him, he would arrange bedroom chairs in rude resemblance of a motor car, and would crouch on the foremost of them, bent forward and staring fixedly ahead, making uncouth and ghastly noises, till the climax was reached when, turning a complete somersault, he would lie prostrate amidst the ruins of the chairs, apparently completely satisfied for the moment. As time passed, however, these painful seizures grew gradually less frequent, and his friends strove to divert his mind into fresh channels. But his interest in other matters did not seem to revive, and he grew apparently languid and depressed. One fine morning, the rat, whose turn it was to go on duty, went upstairs to relieve Badger, whom he found fidgeting to be off and stretch his legs in a long ramble round his wood and down his earths and burrows.
Toad's still in bed, he told the rat outside the door. Can't get much out of him except, leave him alone, he wants nothing. Perhaps he'll be better presently, it may pass off in time, don't be so unduly anxious, and so on. Now you look out, rat, when Toad's quiet and submissive, and playing at being the hero of a Sunday school prize, then he's at his artfulest. There's sure to be something up. I know him. Well now, I must be off.
How are you today, old chap? Inquired the rat cheerfully as he approached Toad's bedside. He had to wait some minutes for an answer. At last a feeble voice replied, "Thank you so much, dear Ratty. So good of you to inquire. But first tell me, how are you yourself, and the excellent Mole?"
"Oh, we're all right," replied the rat. "Mole," he added incautiously, "is going out for a run round with Badger. They'll be out until luncheon time, so you and I will spend a pleasant morning together, and I'll do my best to amuse you. Now jump up, there's a good fellow, and don't lie moping there on a fine morning like this."
"Dear kind rat," murmured Toad, "how little you realize my condition, and how very far I am from jumping up now, if ever. But do not trouble about me. I hate being a burden to my friends, and I do not expect to be one much longer. Indeed, I almost hope not." And here is Toad
Whoops. There it is. Here's Toad lying in his bed, feeble, at death's door, suffering greatly. Poor Toad.
Well, I hope not, too, said the rat heartily. You've been a fine bother to us all this time, and I'm glad to hear it's going to stop. And in weather like this, and the boating season just beginning, it's too bad of you, Toad. It isn't the trouble we mind, but you're making us miss such an awful lot.
I'm afraid it is the trouble you mind, though, replied the Toad languidly. I can quite understand it. It's natural enough. You're tired of bothering about me. I mustn't ask you to do anything further. I'm a nuisance, I know.
You are indeed, said the rat. But I tell you, I'd take any trouble on earth for you, if only you'd be a sensible animal.
If I thought that, Ratty, murmured Toad more feebly than ever, then I would beg you, for the last time probably, to step round to the village as quickly as possible. Even now it may be too late, and fetch the doctor. But don't you bother. It's only a trouble, and perhaps we may as well let things run their course.
Well, why? What do you want a doctor for? Inquired the rat, coming closer and examining him.
He certainly lay very still and flat, and his voice was weaker, and his manner much changed.
Surely you have noticed of late, murmured Toad. But no, why should you? Why should you? Noticing things is only a trouble. Tomorrow, indeed, you may be saying to yourself, oh, if only I had noticed sooner. If only I had done something. But no, it's a trouble. Never mind. Forget that I asked.
Look here, old man, said the rat, beginning to get rather alarmed. Of course I'll fetch a doctor to you, if you really think you want him, but you can hardly be bad enough for that yet. Let's talk about something else.
I fear, dear friend, said Toad with a sad smile, that talk can do little in a case like this, or doctors either. For that matter, still one must grasp at the slightest straw. And, by the way, while you are about it, I hate to give you additional trouble, but I happen to remember that you will pass the door. Would you mind at the same time asking the lawyer to step up? It would be a convenience to me, and there are moments, perhaps I should say there is a moment, when one must face disagreeable tasks at whatever cost to exhausted nature.
A lawyer? Oh, he must be really bad, the affrighted rat said to himself as he hurried from the room, not forgetting, however, to lock the door carefully behind him. Outside he stopped to consider. The other two were far away, and he had no one to consult. It's best to be on the safe side, he said on reflection. I've known Toad fancy himself frightfully bad before, without the slightest reason, but I've never heard him ask for a lawyer. If there's nothing really the matter, the doctor will tell him he's an old ass and cheer him up, and that will be something gained. I'd better humor him and go. It won't take very long. So, he ran off to the village on his errand of mercy. The Toad, who had hopped lightly out of bed as soon as he heard the key turned in the lock, watched him eagerly from the window till he disappeared down the carriage drive. Then, laughing heartily, he dressed as quickly as possible in the smartest suit he could lay hands on at the moment, filled his pockets with cash, which he took from a small drawer in the dressing table, and next, knotting the sheets from his bed together and tying one end of the improvised rope round the central mullion of the handsome Tudor window, which formed such a feature of his bedroom, he scrambled out, slid lightly to the ground, and taking the opposite direction to the rat, marched off light-heartedly, whistling a merry tune.
And here is the wicked toad going out the window as soon as the rat has gone off on his errand. There he is, the wicked toad. Wicked, bad toad. It was a gloomy luncheon for Rat when the Badger and the Mole at length returned, and he had to face them at table with his pitiful and unconvincing story. The Badger's caustic, not to say brutal, remarks may be imagined and therefore passed over, but it was painful to the Rat that even the Mole, though he took his friend's side as far as possible, could not help saying, "You've been a bit of a duffer this time, Ratty. Toad, too, of all animals."
"He did it awfully well," said the crestfallen Rat. "He did you awfully well," rejoined the Badger hotly. "However, talking won't mend matters. He's got clear away for the time, that's certain, and the worst of it is he'll be so conceited with what he'll think is his cleverness that he may commit any folly. One comfort is, we're free now and needn't waste any more of our precious time doing sentry go. But we'd better continue to sleep at Toad Hall for a while longer. Toad may be brought back at any moment, on a stretcher, or between two policemen."
So spoke the Badger, not knowing what the future held in store or how much water, and of how turbid a character, was to run under the bridges before Toad should sit at ease again in his ancestral hall. Meanwhile, Toad, gay and irresponsible, was walking briskly along the high road, some miles from home. At first he had taken bypaths, and crossed many fields, and changed his course several times in case of pursuit. But now, feeling by this time safe from recapture, and the sun smiling brightly on him, and all nature joining in a chorus of approval to the song of self-praise that his own heart was singing to him, he almost danced along the road in his satisfaction and conceit. "Smart piece of work, that," he remarked to himself, chuckling. "Brain against brute force, and brain came out on the top, as it's bound to do. Poor old Ratty! My, won't he catch it when Badger gets back? A worthy fellow, Ratty, with many good qualities, but very little intelligence, and absolutely no education. I must take him in hand some day, and see if I can make something of him." Filled full of conceited thoughts such as these, he strode along, his head in the air, till he reached a little town where the sign of the Red Lion, swinging across the road halfway down the main street, reminded him that he had not breakfasted that day, and that he was exceedingly hungry after his long walk. And here is Toad approaching the Red Lion. I love Ernest Shepard. He marched into the inn, ordered the best luncheon that could be provided at so short a notice, and sat down to eat it in the coffee room. He was about halfway through his meal when an only too familiar sound approaching down the street made him start and fall a-trembling all over. The boop, boop drew nearer and nearer. The car could be heard to turn into the inn-yard and come to a stop, and Toad had to hold on to the leg of the table to conceal his overmastering emotion. Presently the party entered the coffee room, hungry, talkative, and gay, voluble on their experiences of the morning and the merits of the chariot that had brought them along so well. Toad listened eagerly, all ears for a time. At last he could stand it no longer. He slipped out of the room quietly, paid his bill at the bar, and as soon as he got outside, sauntered round quietly to the inn-yard. "There cannot be any harm," he said to himself, "in my only just looking at it." The car stood in the middle of the yard, quite unattended, the stable helps and other hangers-on being all at their dinner. Toad walked slowly round it, inspecting, criticizing, musing deeply.
"I wonder," he said to himself presently, "I wonder if this sort of car starts easily."
Next moment, hardly knowing how it came about, he found he had hold of the handle and was turning it. As the familiar sound broke forth, the old passion seized on Toad and completely mastered him, body and soul. As if in a dream, he found himself somehow seated in the driver's seat. As if in a dream, he pulled the lever and swung the car round the yard and out through the archway. And, as if in a dream, all sense of right and wrong, all fear of obvious consequences seemed temporarily suspended. He increased his pace, and as the car devoured the street and leapt forth on the high road through the open country, he was only conscious that he was Toad once more, Toad at his best and highest, Toad the terror, the traffic queller, the lord of the lone trail, before whom all must give way or be smitten into nothingness and everlasting night. He chanted as he flew, and the car responded with sonorous drone. The miles were eaten up under him as he sped, he knew not whither, fulfilling his instincts, living his hour, reckless of what might come to him.
"To my mind," observed the chairman of the bench of magistrates cheerfully, "the only difficulty that presents itself in this otherwise very clear case is how we can possibly make it sufficiently hot for the incorrigible rogue and hardened ruffian whom we see cowering in the dock before us. Let me see. He has been found guilty on the clearest evidence, first of stealing a valuable motor car, secondly of driving to the public danger, and thirdly of gross impertinence to the rural police. Mr. Clerk, will you tell us, please, what is the very stiffest penalty we can impose for each of these offenses, without, of course, giving the prisoner the benefit of any doubt, because there isn't any?"
The clerk scratched his nose with his pen. "Some people would consider," he observed, "that stealing the motor car was the worst offense, and so it is. But cheeking the police undoubtedly carries the severest penalty, and so it ought. Supposing you were to say 12 months for the theft, which is mild, and 3 years for the furious driving, which is lenient, and 15 years for the cheek, which was pretty bad sort of cheek, judging by what we've heard from the witness box, even if you only believe 1/10 part of what you heard, and I never believe more myself. Those figures, if added together correctly, tot up to 19 years.
"First rate,"
said the chairman. "So you had better make it around 20 years and be on the safe side," concluded the clerk. And here's a picture first of the learned officers of the court, the magistrate and various clerks and others. And here is the very, very self-sorry Toad in the witness box with the policeman, presumably, who is guarding over him.
"An excellent suggestion," said the chairman approvingly. "Prisoner, pull yourself together and try to stand up straight. It's going to be 20 years for you this time. And mind, if you appear before us again upon any charge whatsoever, we shall have to deal with you very seriously."
Then the brutal minions of the law fell upon the hapless Toad, loaded him with chains, and dragged him from the courthouse, shrieking, praying, protesting across the marketplace, where the playful populace, always as severe upon detected crime as they are sympathetic and helpful, when one is merely wanted, assailed him with jeers, carrots, and popular catchwords. Past hooting school children, their innocent faces lit up with the pleasure they ever derive from the sight of a gentleman in difficulties. Across the hollow-sounding drawbridge, below the spiky portcullis, under the frowning archway of the grim old castle, whose ancient towers soared high overhead, past guardrooms full of grinning soldiery, off duty, past sentries who coughed in a horrid sarcastic way, because that is as much as a sentry on his post dare do to show his contempt and abhorrence of crime, up time-worn winding stairs, past men-at-arms in casket and corselet of steel, darting threatening looks through their vizards, across courtyards where mastiffs strained at their leash and pawed the air to get at him, past ancient warders, their halberds leant against the wall, dozing over a pasty and a flagon of brown ale. On and on past the rack chamber and the thumbscrew room, past the turning that led to the private scaffold, till they reached the door of the grimmest dungeon that lay in the heart of the innermost keep. There at last they paused, where an ancient jailer sat fingering a bunch of mighty keys. And here, by the way, is the toad being taken away.
"Odds bodkins," said the sergeant of police, taking off his helmet and wiping his forehead. "Rouse thee, old loon, and take over from us this vile toad, a criminal of deepest guilt and matchless artfulness and resource. Watch and ward him with all thy skill, and mark thee well, greybeard. Should aught untoward befall, thy old head shall answer for his, and a murrain on both of them." The jailer nodded grimly, laying his withered hand on the shoulder of the miserable toad. The rusty key creaked in the lock, the great door clanged behind them, and Toad was a helpless prisoner in the remotest dungeon of the best guarded keep of the stoutest castle in all the length and breadth of merry England. Now we are going to briefly leave Toad behind and read a little bit of Chapter 7, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, although I think I'm only going to be able to start this one. The willow wren was twittering his thin little song, hidden himself in the dark selvage of the riverbank. Though it was past 10 o'clock at night, the sky still clung to and retained some lingering skirts of light from the departed day, and the sullen heats of the torrid afternoon broke up and rolled away at the dispersing touch of the cool fingers of the short midsummer night. Mole lay stretched on the bank, still panting from the stress of the fierce day that had been cloudless from dawn to late sunset, and waited for his friend to return. He had been on the river with some companions, leaving the water rat free to keep an engagement of long standing with Otter, and he had come back to find the house dark and deserted, and no sign of Rat, who was doubtless keeping it up late with his old comrade. It was still too hot to think of staying indoors, so he lay on some cool dock leaves and thought over the past day and its doings, and how very good they had all been. The rat's light footfall was presently heard approaching over the parched grass. "Oh, the blessed coolness," he said, and sat down, gazing thoughtfully into the river, silent and preoccupied. "You stayed to supper, of course?" said the mole presently. "Simply had to," said the rat. "They wouldn't hear of me going before. You know how kind they always are, and they made things as jolly for me as ever they could, right up to the moment I left. But I felt a brute all the time, as it was clear to me they were very unhappy, though they tried to hide it. Mole, I'm afraid they're in trouble. Little Portly is missing again, and you know what a lot his father thinks of him, though he never says much about it." "What, that child? said the mole lightly. Well, suppose he is. Why worry about it? He's always straying off and getting lost and turning up again. He's so adventurous. But no harm ever happens to him. Everybody hereabout knows him and likes him, just as they do old Otter. You may be sure some animal or other will come across him and bring him back again all right. Why, we found him ourselves, miles from home, and quite self-possessed and cheerful. Yes, but this time it's more serious, said the rat gravely. He's been missing for some days now, and the Otters have hunted everywhere, high and low, without finding the slightest trace. And they've asked every animal, too, for miles around. No one knows anything about him. Otter's evidently more anxious than he'll admit. I got out of him that young Portly hasn't learnt to swim very well yet, and I can see he's thinking of the weir. There's a lot of water coming down still, considering the time of year, and the place always had a fascination for the child. And then there are, well, traps and things. You know. Otter's not the fellow to be nervous about any son of his before it's time. And now he is nervous. When I left, he came out with me, said he wanted some air, and talked about stretching his legs, but I could see it wasn't that. So I drew him out and pumped him, and got it all from him at last. He was going to spend the day watching by the ford. You know the place where the old ford used to be in bygone days before they built the bridge. I know it well, said the mole, but why should Otter choose to watch there? Well, it seems that it was there he gave Portly his first swimming lesson, continued the rat, from that shallow, gravelly spit near the bank. And it was there he used to teach him fishing, and there young Portly caught his first fish, of which he was so very proud. The child loved the spot, and Otter thinks that if he came wandering back from wherever he is, if he is anywhere by this time, poor little chap, he might make for the ford he was so fond of, or if he came across it, he'd remember it well and stop there and play, perhaps. So Otter goes there every night and watches, on the chance, you know, just on the chance. They were silent for a time, both thinking of the same thing, the lonely, heart-sore Otter crouched by the ford, watching and waiting the long night through, on the chance. Well, said the rat presently, I suppose we ought to be thinking about turning in. But he never offered to move. Rat, said the mole, I simply can't go and turn in and go to sleep and do nothing, even though there doesn't seem to be anything to be done. We'll get the boat out and paddle upstream. The moon will be up in an hour or so, and then we will search as well as we can. Anyhow, it will be better than going to bed and doing nothing. Just what I was thinking myself, said the rat. It's not the sort of night for bed anyhow, and daybreak is not so very far off, and then we may pick up some news of him from early risers as we go along. And I think that's where we're going to stop for the night before we get into the Piper at the Gates of Dawn properly. Let me see if I can now access any of the comments. I see Mark and I see Petra, who I hadn't seen before, and Nikki. Hello, good to see you all. I don't know where the comments that I was supposed to be able to actually see how many people were on and who it was. That stuff has all disappeared somewhere. Oh, God, it is so crazy. Okay, anyway, enough is enough. I won't worry about it anymore. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to wrap it up. That's where we're going to stop for tonight. We will continue with the Piper at the Gates of Dawn tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow, tonight, later tonight. 7 p.m., same as per usual. I will probably have an update on what we find out about Johnny, although, as I said, he's doing much better in general. I think that's about it. Don't really have a whole lot else to say. It's 2 o'clock in the morning here in California.
and I am going to roll. So sorry to all of you I didn't get to say hello to tonight. YouTube was, or not YouTube, Facebook was giving me weird stuff instead of giving me the list of the people who had commented or checked in or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, but so I am going to do is to say thank you for all of you who did show up. And I hope to see you very soon. Take good care of yourselves, your loved ones, your friends and neighbors, and keep an eye out for those who might need some help. And again, thank you very much for joining me. Peace. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good day, whatever time it is, wherever you may happen to be. And it's a pleasure to spend some time with you.